Once upon a time, these cars weren't just vehicles. They were rolling palaces built only for the elite. Gold-trimmed interiors, thunderous engines, and styling so elegant it made ordinary cars look like scrap metal. These were the dream machines of the rich, the kind of rides most people could only admire from afar. Today, they've been forgotten by many, but their luxury still whispers stories of power and status. Get ready, because we're about to uncover 15 forgotten luxury old cars, made for the rich, not for you.
Dear viewers, we have set a goal to reach 30,000 subscribers by the end of this year. With your support, we can make it happen, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. Thank you. The 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham is one of those extraordinary artifacts from a time when American automakers believed there was no limit to how bold, how excessive, and how technologically ambitious a luxury car could be. It wasn't just transportation. It was a statement of power, privilege, and technological ego. In 1958, this was the car you bought to make sure everyone on your street knew exactly how much better off you were than they were. It had the flash, the engineering, the price, and the reputation to back it up, at least on paper. But beneath the extravagant stainless steel roof and the mile-long options list was a mechanical diva that could drain wallets, test patience, and turn the proudest owner into a regular at their local service garage. The design alone made sure you couldn't ignore it. The Eldorado Brougham was massive, sculpted with exaggerated elegance, dripping with chrome and topped with that famous brushed stainless steel roof that reflected sunlight like a mirror. The body lines were sleek, with sharp tail fins rising confidently at the rear, and the front end featured stacked headlights that gave the car a bold, commanding stare. It was lower and longer than almost anything else on the road. Just pulling up to a restaurant in an Eldorado Brougham felt like a red carpet moment. The car didn't simply arrive, it made an entrance. And it should have. The base price was over $13,000 in 1958, more expensive than many houses of the era and roughly triple the cost of a standard Cadillac sedan. This was no middle-class dream machine. This was the automotive equivalent of a silk top hat. Inside, it was an experience designed to make its occupants feel like royalty. The cabin featured individually adjustable seats, power everything, magnetic drink tumblers, a cigarette case, a tissue dispenser, and even a perfume atomizer. Every surface was covered in the finest materials Cadillac could muster: rich leather, gleaming chrome trim, polished metal switches, and deeply padded seating. It was as if the designers asked, what would a luxury train car look like if it had four wheels, and then answered with excess at every corner. Even the rear doors were rear-hinged, creating a limousine-like grand entry for passengers. This was not just a car. This was a rolling lounge for the privileged. But all of that excess came with a price beyond the sticker. Underneath its gleaming skin lay one of the most temperamental mechanical systems of its era, an air suspension system designed to provide a perfectly level, cloud-smooth ride no matter the load or road conditions. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was an unpredictable nightmare. The self-leveling air suspension leaked, sagged, and failed constantly. Owners would park their majestic Eldorado Brougham in the evening, only to find it kneeling pitifully in the driveway the next morning like a tired old mule. Repairing it required not only money, but also mechanics who understood the system. And in 1958, those were rare. Many owners ended up ripping out the air suspension entirely and retrofitting coil springs just to keep the car drivable. The drivetrain was also advanced but not always cooperative. Under the hood, the car carried Cadillac's 365 cubic inch V8 engine producing 335 horsepower paired to a hydromatic automatic transmission. It had more than enough power to propel its immense weight down the highway in smooth, confident strides. When everything worked correctly, the Eldorado Brougham floated along like a yacht on glass, isolating passengers from wind, noise, and road harshness. But when something went wrong, which it often did, repairs were punishingly expensive. Cadillac built the car with hand-assembled precision, meaning parts weren't just sitting on shelves in every dealership. Many components were unique to the Brougham, making even small fixes disproportionately difficult and costly. Electrical gremlins were another regular guest in the Brougham experience. The car's many power accessories, windows, seats, locks, trunk release, memory functions, were cutting edge at the time, but notoriously prone to failure. Owners quickly learned that while everything in the car was, technically, powered, not everything was reliably functional. A switch might work one day and stubbornly refuse the next. And the more features Cadillac added, the more things could and did break. Driving it was an experience unlike any other car of its era. When functioning properly, it was serene and almost eerily quiet, gliding over roads with a cushioned, effortless motion. But its sheer weight and size made it unwieldy in tight spaces, and the suspension, while smooth, had a tendency to wallow around corners like a great ship fighting the tide. Braking required patience and forethought. The power-assisted brakes worked well, but slowing down 2.5 tons of steel and luxury was never graceful. The steering was light, almost too light, giving a sense of floating disconnected from the pavement, an experience that could be disconcerting for drivers used to a more conventional feel. All of this extravagance contributed to one of the most infamous realities of the 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham. Owning it was like adopting a high-maintenance opera star. When it worked, it was glorious, one of the most magnificent luxury cars ever built in America. When it didn't, it threw tantrums that emptied bank accounts. Many owners who initially purchased it as a status symbol found themselves selling it after a year or two out of sheer frustration. As one former owner reportedly quipped decades later, "The car made me feel like a king, and then bankrupted me like a fool." Production numbers were low, only 304 units in 1958, and each car was hand-built, making every surviving example today a rare and expensive collector's item. Enthusiasts love it not because it was practical or reliable, but because it represents the absolute peak of 1950s American excess. A gleaming, finned monument to a time when Detroit believed luxury was measured in weight, chrome, and gadgets. Today, the 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham is remembered as both a masterpiece and a cautionary tale. It was breathtakingly beautiful, dripping with style and innovation, but also cursed with mechanical fragility and astronomical maintenance costs. It's a car that perfectly illustrates how the line between genius and folly in the automotive world can be very, very thin. When new, it was the ultimate way to say, "I'm better than you." But a few months later, many of its owners found themselves saying, "I can't afford this anymore."
The 1964 Imperial Crown was supposed to be Chrysler's triumphant answer to the likes of Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special and Lincoln Continental, a car that would plant the Imperial name firmly among the highest echelons of American luxury. It was bold, expensive, and heavy. The kind of car that didn't just sit in a driveway, it presided over it. But behind that long, imposing body and its chrome crown lay a reality that was far less dignified. While Chrysler poured money into its styling and its marketing, the Imperial Crown of 1964 turned out to be one of those grand machines that looked like royalty on the outside, but behaved like an aging circus elephant on the road. The exterior had presence, there's no denying that. Measuring well over 18 feet long and weighing north of 4,700 pounds, the Imperial was an enormous slab of Detroit steel, dressed in restrained but unmistakable late mid-century styling. It wore thick chrome bumpers like armor, featured a long hood and a formal roofline, and carried the bold, stand-up Imperial eagle on its prow like a medieval crest. The front end had the unmistakable freestanding headlamps, one of its trademarks, that gave it a stately, slightly intimidating look, like a car that belonged in a motorcade. But elegance is only skin deep, and the longer you spent with the Crown, the more its dignity started to unravel. Inside, Chrysler clearly wanted to give passengers the sense of being in a moving drawing room. Plush broadcloth or leather seats, thick carpeting, plenty of bright metal trim, and a dashboard that attempted to mimic the look of fine architecture filled the cabin. But look a little closer, and the illusion cracked. The dashboard switches and knobs were crudely designed, as if someone raided a hardware store bin for spare parts. The materials didn't always match, the fit and finish was inconsistent, and the climate controls were finicky. The car had power everything, seats, windows, locks, but it often felt as though each function was barely holding itself together. A stiff button here, a loose lever there, a wandering speedometer needle, a blower motor that sounded like a hairdryer on its last breath. It was luxury in intention, not always in execution. On the road, the Imperial Crown's shortcomings grew more apparent. Chrysler engineers aimed for a soft, floaty ride, a classic American luxury hallmark of the era, and they succeeded, but perhaps too well. The suspension was so marshmallow soft that the car didn't glide, it wallowed. Every corner turned into a slow, deliberate lean, like maneuvering a bus through a crowded parking lot. Body roll was substantial, steering response was vague and lazy, and trying to hustle the car through a curve felt like negotiating with a reluctant elephant. It was undeniably smooth on a straight highway, but pointed anywhere that required precision, and the Imperial made sure to remind you of its sheer bulk and leisurely temperament. The 413 cubic inch V8 engine under the hood produced 340 horsepower, a mighty figure on paper, and when coaxed, the Imperial Crown could move with surprising authority in a straight line. The problem was stopping and turning that much mass afterward. The brakes were power-assisted drums, not discs, which faded easily under stress and demanded long stopping distances. The steering, heavily boosted, required minimal effort but gave almost no feedback. It was like piloting a land yacht with a loose rudder, more about suggestion than control. And then there were the leaks. These cars were notorious for fluid seepage, oil, transmission fluid, power steering fluid, coolant, take your pick. Many owners joked that if their Imperial wasn't leaking, it was probably empty. Another frequent source of headaches was the electrical system. Chrysler equipped the Imperial Crown with more gadgets than the average car of its era, but the wiring harnesses and connectors were often unreliable. Power windows stuck, seat motors stalled, instrument lights flickered, and turn signals occasionally decided not to participate in traffic. The car was advanced for its time, but finicky. Every gadget was another potential failure point. Some mechanics of the era referred to working on these cars as plumbing a luxury submarine, because everything seemed buried, leaky, and overly complicated. Fuel consumption, of course, was abysmal. Moving nearly 2.5 tons of steel and chrome with a big block V8 was never going to be economical. But Imperial buyers weren't supposed to care. The problem was, as the car aged, its once smooth powertrain developed quirks, hesitation off the line, rough idles on hot days, that made its thirst for premium gas feel even less justified. A pristine 1964 Imperial Crown could float down the boulevard like a luxury liner. A worn one felt like an underpowered tugboat trying to pull a battleship. One owner famously quipped, "Driving an Imperial is like steering a sofa down a bowling lane. You don't really drive it, you just guide it gently and hope nothing gets in your way." Another added, "Every time I parked it, I could swear I left an oil slick big enough to star in a spy movie." These weren't isolated complaints, they were common refrains among people who bought the Crown, expecting Cadillac caliber refinement, and got something far more clumsy. And yet, for all its flaws, the 1964 Imperial Crown remains a fascinating piece of automotive history. It represents Chrysler's last great push to compete head-to-head with the titans of luxury.
It was hand-assembled more carefully than standard Chrysler products, with extra attention to sound deadening, ride isolation, and trim. When new, it exuded status, and its bold styling still turns heads today. But it also serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that a car can look magnificent and cost a fortune, but if it drives like a school bus, leaks like a shipwreck, and ages like a tired old barge, it can never truly wear the crown it claims. The 1964 Imperial Crown was meant to be Chrysler's luxury flagship, a majestic road cruiser for the elite. What it often became was a stubborn, clumsy, high-maintenance companion that required patience, deep pockets, and a sense of humor. It's remembered less for the smoothness of its engineering than for the drama it brought with it. A grand machine with royal aspirations, undone by its very excess.
When people talk about the excess of 1970s American luxury cars, few vehicles embody that era's bloated glamour quite as perfectly as the 1976 Lincoln Continental Mark IV. It wasn't a car built to be efficient, nimble, or practical in any rational sense. It was a monument to size, to chrome, to unnecessary gadgets, to the belief that bigger always meant better. It was the automotive equivalent of shag carpeting, gold chains, and mirrored ceilings. It didn't whisper luxury, it screamed it through opera windows and fake spare tire humps. The Mark IV was absurdly long, stretching over 19 feet from its blunt chrome nose to the decorative hump in the trunklet. The hood was so massive that when you sat behind the wheel, you almost felt like you were commanding a ship from its bridge. The fenders stretched out in both directions like broad wings, and the front grille was a towering wall of chrome that looked like it was designed to frighten lesser cars into submission. Its signature opera windows, those small oval portals in the C-pillars, were not functional but purely decorative, because in the 1970s, nothing said class, quite like spending extra money on useless design flourishes. Under that endless hood lived a 460 cubic inch V8 engine, a lump of Detroit iron that had once been a source of raw power, but by 1976 was strangled by emissions controls. It groaned rather than roared, pushing nearly 5,000 pounds of rolling living room forward with all the urgency of a tired old bulldog. On paper, the numbers seemed grand, but the reality was sluggish acceleration, vague throttle response, and the very real experience of watching the fuel gauge drop in real time. It achieved around 8 miles per gallon if the wind was right and your foot was gentle, but most owners swore they never saw anything better than 6. The ride was soft. Not soft in a refined European grand touring way, but soft in the sense that every bump, corner, and imperfection in the road was absorbed into a floaty, disconnected blur. It didn't so much take corners as it wandered through them like a drunk man looking for the exit. The suspension was tuned to prioritize smoothness over control, so the moment you tried to do anything more spirited than a leisurely cruise down a straight boulevard, the car would wallow, heave, and gently protest. Steering had all the feedback of stirring soup with a wooden spoon. And braking, that was a terrifying experience if you didn't plan a football field in advance. Inside, the Mark IV was a world of over-the-top comfort. The seats were thick, pillowy, and wrapped in velour or leather, depending on the trim. They were less seats than they were thrones. You didn't sit in a Mark IV, you reclined, you floated, you disappeared into a soft cocoon that smelled faintly of vinyl, cigarette smoke, and 1970s America. The dashboard was a festival of fake wood, plastic chrome, and an astonishing array of buttons, switches, and climate controls that frequently decided to stop working whenever they felt like it. Everything was big, soft, and exaggerated. Even the steering wheel felt like it belonged on a tugboat. And then there was the sheer impracticality of living with it. Parking a Mark IV was not a skill, it was an ordeal. Its turning radius was laughable, its visibility was compromised by massive pillars and a hood so long you couldn't see its end. And its weight made every parking maneuver feel like guiding a small yacht into a slip.
On tight city streets, it was hopelessly out of place, like a barge stranded in a canal. And heaven help you if you needed to parallel park, many owners simply didn't bother. But perhaps the most infamous part of owning one wasn't the driving or the parking, it was the upkeep. That 460 V8 was thirsty and temperamental. The electrical systems were fragile and unpredictable. The automatic climate control, a luxury feature Lincoln loved to boast about, often failed. The vacuum-operated headlights liked to stay shut when you needed them most. And every trip to the gas station felt like paying tribute to a dying empire. Former owners often joked that the fuel gauge was more like a countdown timer. Yet, despite all this, people loved it. Or at least, they loved the idea of it. Owning a Mark IV in the mid-1970s was a symbol. It said, I'm above the gas crisis. I'm above practicality. I float through life in comfort. It was a car for those who wanted to glide, not drive. One man who owned a new one back in the day described it like this. When you closed the door, the outside world disappeared. You didn't feel the bumps, the traffic, or the noise. You just floated. And when you looked down at the fuel gauge, you cried. But the reality caught up quickly. The oil crisis didn't care about opera windows. Rising fuel costs turned these beasts from status symbols into burdens. People who once felt like royalty behind the wheel now felt foolish at the pump. Repairs became expensive, parts were a nightmare to find, and younger buyers in the late 1970s no longer wanted their parents' rolling living rooms. Today, the 1976 Lincoln Continental Mark IV stands as a perfect time capsule of its era. It wasn't a good car in the practical sense. It was heavy, wasteful, and over-designed, but it was unforgettable. A symbol of an America that believed the bigger the car, the greater the luxury. It was absurd. It was excessive. And that's precisely why people still remember it. For better or worse, it's not just a car. It's a monument to a vanished way of thinking.
The 1972 Buick Riviera boat tail is one of those machines that can stop people dead in their tracks, not because it's universally loved, but because it's so gloriously strange. It was as if Buick's design department, at the height of early 1970s American excess, decided to build a car that was part speedboat, part land yacht, and entirely unapologetic. You can't talk about this car without talking about that rear end. Long, curved, pointed inward like the stern of a boat, with a massive wraparound rear window that gave it an unmistakable, almost cartoonishly dramatic profile. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't practical, but it was unforgettable. When Buick rolled this thing out, it was supposed to be a personal luxury car that combined elegance with power. What they actually created was a 2-ton behemoth with proportions so exaggerated that parking one felt like docking a vessel. At nearly 19 feet long, with a hood big enough to hold a small picnic, the boat-tail Riviera didn't drive down the road so much as it floated, sometimes gracefully, often clumsily. The turning circle was a small tragedy. Every U-turn felt like an event. Trying to maneuver it in a tight parking lot could make a grown man sweat, and parallel parking one on a city street, that was a test of patience and geometry. Under the hood, the Riviera had a 455 cubic inch V8 engine, which, on paper, gave it plenty of muscle. But in practice, the engine was tuned more for effortless cruising than excitement. It made a lot of noise, drank fuel like a party animal on payday, and turned gasoline into forward momentum with all the efficiency of a bonfire. Owners back then joked that you didn't watch the fuel gauge drop, you felt it. You could practically measure your trips in dollars per mile. And with the oil crisis looming just a year away, this sort of gas-guzzling bravado was about to fall out of favor hard. But the engine wasn't the only expense. The Riviera boat-tail was an expensive car to maintain even when new. Its massive panels, unique curved glass, and oddly shaped rear section meant that repairs weren't just pricey, they were nightmares. Break that signature rear glass and you weren't just paying for a window, you were paying for a work of rolling sculpture. And because the car was loaded with early 1970s luxury features like power windows, climate controls, and chrome trim that aged like soft cheese, owners often found themselves trapped in an endless cycle of fixing small, expensive problems. And then there was how it drove. The suspension was soft, designed to smooth out the highway. At 60 miles per hour on a straight, freshly paved interstate, it was serene, like lounging on a sofa in a floating hotel room. But the moment the road twisted even a little, the car revealed its true nature. The steering was vague, slow, and numb, like trying to guide a cruise ship with a paddle. The brakes worked, but not with the urgency you'd want in a car this large. Body roll was so dramatic that some drivers said it felt like the car was trying to roll over and take a nap on its side. And with a weight creeping toward 5,000 pounds, it carried its mass like a weary old prize fighter. Inside, Buick went all in on what it thought was luxury. The cabin was filled with padded vinyl, chrome strips, and deeply cushioned seats that felt less like car seats and more like armchairs in your uncle's den. The dashboard stretched out like a control panel in a low-budget sci-fi film, with square gauges and knobs scattered in a way that only made sense after you spent weeks with the car. Everything was oversized: the steering wheel, the door panels, the trim. It was designed to make you feel important, even if you were just idling in traffic while the engine gulped fuel beneath the hood. And yet, for all its impracticality, people who owned the boat tail often remember it with a strange affection. It was goofy, yes, but it had presence. When you rolled down the street in a 1972 Buick Riviera boat tail, people noticed. One former owner once said, "You didn't drive it because it made sense. You drove it because everyone turned to look when you passed." It was a car that didn't care about blending in. It wanted to be seen, even if what people were seeing made them scratch their heads. But the boat tail's uniqueness also sealed its fate. It was too weird for the mainstream market, too big for the rising gas prices of the mid-1970s, and too expensive to keep alive without serious dedication. Buick quietly abandoned the boat tail styling by 1974, replacing it with something safer, more conventional. That distinctive rear end became a short-lived relic of a time when American car companies still thought the answer to everything was, make it bigger. Today, the 1972 Buick Riviera boat tail stands as both a legend and a punchline. Some collectors revere it as an icon of bold, fearless design. Others see it as the moment American luxury cars drifted completely out of touch with reality. But no one forgets it. You can love it or hate it, but you can't ignore it. It is, in every sense, a car that thought it was a yacht, and in its own ridiculous way, that's why it's unforgettable.
The 1957 Packard Clipper wasn't just a car. It was the desperate gasp of a once great automaker struggling to stay alive in an era that had already passed it by. There was a time when Packard was a name spoken with reverence, a symbol of prestige, power, and quiet wealth. But by the mid-1950s, the brand was on life support, and the Clipper was supposed to be its savior. Instead, it became the nail in the coffin, a car that screamed compromise, cost-cutting, and confusion. The story begins with Packard's slow decline after World War II. Competitors like Cadillac and Lincoln had embraced modern styling and engineering, while Packard hesitated, still trying to trade on the grandeur of its pre-war image. When sales began to nosedive, Packard merged with Studebaker in a last-ditch attempt to survive. But instead of creating a bold new luxury car to reclaim the throne, the 1957 Packard Clipper emerged as a barely disguised Studebaker with extra chrome glued on top. It wasn't a Packard born from engineering brilliance, it was a rebadged compromise. And buyers could tell. From the outside, the 1957 Clipper tried hard to look upscale, but its styling betrayed its origins. The front end wore a vaguely Packard-like grille, but the lines didn't flow, they clashed. The proportions were off, the chrome trim seemed tacked on at random, and the fins looked like they were designed by someone who had only seen pictures of Cadillacs from a distance. It was a car that didn't know what it wanted to be. Part luxury, part mid-market, part desperation project. A journalist at the time famously called it a Packard in name, but a Studebaker in everything else. And that stung, because it was true. The interior didn't help matters. Packard had once been known for quiet, elegant cabins with rich materials and impeccable craftsmanship. The Clipper had thin door panels, rattling dash trim, and upholstery that felt more like a mid-range taxi than a luxury car. The fit and finish were poor, with gaps that let wind and rain creep inside. One owner, years later, recalled how the car whistled like a tea kettle at highway speeds. Others complained that the doors leaked during storms, soaking the carpet and creating mildew smells that no amount of air freshener could mask. Mechanically, the Clipper was a shadow of Packard's former glory. Gone were the smooth, powerful straight eights and the engineering innovations that had once made the company famous. In their place sat Studebaker's V8, which, while serviceable, lacked the refinement expected of a Packard. The ride quality was harsh, the suspension squeaked and groaned, and the handling felt uncertain, as if the car itself wasn't entirely convinced it wanted to stay on the road. Owners often described it as soft but shaky, a car that wallowed in corners and rattled over bumps like an old dresser being dragged across a floor. But perhaps the most damaging part of the Clipper story was the betrayal of brand image. People bought Packards because they were exclusive, elegant, and proud. But in 1957, anyone with an eye could tell the Clipper was a Studebaker dressed up in borrowed clothes. Even loyal Packard buyers walked into showrooms, took one look, and quietly turned away. Wealthier customers fled to Cadillac, Lincoln, and Chrysler's Imperial. Those who did buy the Clipper often regretted it when they discovered the build quality was nowhere near the Packards they remembered. One owner, interviewed decades later, said bitterly, "It wasn't a Packard. It was a Studebaker wearing a cheap Halloween mask." Another admitted that after 2 years of constant leaks, rattles, and expensive parts that were hard to find, he sold the car for a fraction of what he paid. To make matters worse, the Clipper was introduced at a moment when the luxury car market was becoming fiercely competitive. Cadillac was on top of the world, Lincoln was refining its big cruisers, and Chrysler was pushing forward with engineering and style. Packard, once the king of the hill, looked like it was limping along with scraps. The 1957 Clipper didn't just not impress, it made the brand look weak, out of touch, and cheap. The car's sales numbers were pitiful, and Packard, already hanging by a thread, couldn't recover from the blow. The Clipper was not just a failed model, it was a public admission that Packard no longer had the resources to build a true Packard. Production ended shortly after, and within a year, the once proud Packard name was essentially dead, remembered only by a few enthusiasts and historians. Today, the 1957 Packard Clipper exists as a car motive ghost, a relic of what happens when a legendary company loses its identity. Some collectors keep them alive as curiosities, reminders of an era when even giants could fall. Its rattles, leaks, and awkward styling make it a punchline to some, but to others, it's a tragic symbol of decline. It's not the car that saved Packard, it's the car that helped bury it, one leaky, rattling mile at a time.
The 1969 Lincoln Continental Mark III is one of those cars that perfectly captures the contradiction of late 1960s American luxury. Bold, brash, impossibly large, and so desperate to look classy that it ends up being unintentionally cartoonish. It was supposed to be Ford's way of reclaiming the luxury throne from Cadillac, an elegant grand tourer for the powerful and the rich. Instead, what they built was a 2-ton marshmallow, with a grille that tried a little too hard to look like a Rolls-Royce, wrapped around a driving experience that felt more like steering a barge than piloting a fine automobile. Ford's top brass had made it clear in the late 1960s, Lincoln had to look expensive, intimidating, and unmistakable. So, the Mark III arrived with a towering, square-edged front end, an upright Rolls-style grille, hidden headlamps, and a long, impossibly flat hood that stretched out like a parade float. Its proportions were dramatic, even elegant from some angles, but there was also something undeniably forced about it. Where European luxury cars like Mercedes and Jaguar whispered refinement, the Mark III screamed I'm rich, with the subtlety of a marching band. Under the hood sat Ford's massive 460 cubic inch V8, a brute of an engine with 365 horsepower. On paper, that was impressive. In reality, it was moving nearly 5,000 pounds of steel, chrome, and vinyl. Acceleration wasn't quick so much as it was determined. When you stepped on the gas, there was a deep, lazy growl, and then a long, smooth surge forward, not unlike a freight train slowly gaining speed. Fuel economy hovered somewhere between dismal and tragic, a problem the oil crisis of the 1970s would soon make very real. At best, you could expect single-digit miles per gallon, and if you were heavy-footed, you could practically watch the fuel gauge drop. But the real comedy of the Mark III wasn't its thirst, it was the way it drove. The suspension was tuned to be softer than a feather mattress, soaking up bumps until the car floated like a sofa on helium. The steering was so overboosted that you could turn the wheel with a single finger, but it offered about as much feedback as a bowl of pudding. You didn't steer a Mark III, you suggested a direction, and it eventually agreed. On the highway, it glided, but on narrow streets or curves, it felt like trying to guide a cruise ship through a canal. One journalist at the time famously said, "The Mark III drives like it was built for straight lines only." The brakes were another adventure. With drum brakes standard and optional front discs, slowing the Mark III required both planning and prayer. Stopping quickly was not in its vocabulary. Many owners remembered learning to keep an extra car length ahead at all times because, in an emergency stop, the Lincoln reacted like a whale hitting the beach. Add in the vague steering, and it made for some truly exciting moments if the road ever decided to curve unexpectedly. Inside, Lincoln spared no effort in trying to make you feel like royalty. Thick carpeting, deeply padded leather seats, and acres of fake wood veneer covered everything. The dashboard had an almost regal symmetry to it, but much of the trim was plastic pretending to be walnut, and it aged about as gracefully as a lawn chair in the sun. Every surface was designed to coddle, not to connect. The seats were soft to the point where drivers often sunk into them like a beanbag, and on long trips, it could feel like driving from your living room. This was a car for the kind of driver who wanted to float above the world, not engage with it. Of course, Lincoln leaned hard on image. The fake Rolls-Royce grille wasn't an accident. It was a direct attempt to give the car a European aristocratic air without actually engineering any of that refinement into it. In practice, it came off as loud and self-conscious. People either loved the styling for its boldness or laughed at it for its obvious mimicry. One contemporary reviewer dryly noted that it looks like a Lincoln that's pretending to be something it's not. And then there were the quirks, and not the charming kind. The vacuum-operated headlight doors had a nasty habit of refusing to open or close properly as the car aged. The power windows and seats were notorious for sluggish operation or failing entirely. Rust crept into wheel wells and rocker panels with surprising speed for such an expensive car. Many owners found themselves sinking more money into keeping the car running than they'd ever planned. But for a certain kind of buyer in 1969, none of that mattered. What mattered was size, presence, and the feeling of floating down the boulevard like a titan of industry. One former owner years later described it perfectly. Driving the Mark III was like sitting on a sofa in your living room, except your living room was going 70 miles an hour. It wasn't about handling or precision, it was about spectacle. The 1969 Lincoln Continental Mark III ultimately sold well enough to help keep Lincoln afloat. But its legacy is complicated. It's remembered not for its engineering brilliance, but for its audacity. A car that tried to dress up brute size as sophistication. It was a reminder of an era when American luxury was defined not by refinement, but by weight, chrome, and a thirst for gasoline. It was all size and no sense, a giant marshmallow on wheels with a grille that tried a little too hard to look like a Rolls-Royce. And for that, it's both infamous and iconic. The 1975 Cadillac Seville was supposed to be a turning point. For decades, Cadillac had ruled American luxury with its enormous, soft-riding, chrome-laden land yachts. But by the mid-1970s, the world had changed. Gasoline was expensive, European luxury brands like Mercedes-Benz and BMW were stealing market share, and Cadillac needed something that could whisper refinement instead of shouting excess. So they built the Seville, a smaller, supposedly more sophisticated luxury sedan that was meant to show Europe that Detroit could play the same game. Unfortunately, what they delivered was a car that tried so hard to be modern that it ended up being a very expensive, unreliable pretender. On the surface, the Seville looked different from the massive DeVilles and Fleetwoods Cadillac was known for. Its design was tidier, boxier, and cleaner, borrowing subtle cues from European sedans of the era. But underneath that veneer of elegance was not a bespoke luxury platform. It was a heavily reworked Chevrolet Nova chassis, a cost-cutting decision that would come back to haunt Cadillac. They poured money into dressing it up, but its bones were humble economy car steel. When buyers looked closer, they saw the cracks. The Seville's proportions were meant to evoke European restraint, but its execution carried all the weight of American luxury car trying to fake an accent. The car was bloated for its class, heavy for its size, and still stuffed with the kind of thick padding, vinyl roofs, and chrome trim that Europe had long abandoned. Cadillac talked about continental sophistication, but the Seville still rode like a couch on a bouncy castle and steered with all the delicacy of a parade float. Power came from a 350 cubic inch V8 engine that Cadillac borrowed and fuel-injected in a bid to make it modern. It was smoother than some of their old carbureted beasts, but far from refined. It wasn't quick either. The Seville was heavy, nearly 2 tons, and while the engine worked hard, acceleration was leisurely at best. Owners often joked that flooring the pedal didn't give you speed, it gave you noise. Fuel economy, even with the fuel injection, was miserable, hovering in the low teens at best. At a time when buyers were turning to lighter, more efficient European cars, Cadillac's small car was still a thirsty giant in disguise. The ride quality was Cadillac's usual soft, wallowy affair. If the road was straight and smooth, it was serene, like floating on a thick carpet. But the moment the pavement curved or rippled, the Seville showed its true nature. Body roll was immense. The steering was overboosted to the point of numbness, and braking required commitment. This was not a nimble car. It was a smaller Cadillac wearing European clothes, but refusing to learn how to dance. Inside, Cadillac spared no expense in making the Seville look expensive, at least from a distance. The cabin was trimmed in vinyl pretending to be leather, fake wood pretending to be walnut, and chrome-plated plastic pretending to be something it wasn't. It was flashy, but it didn't have the craftsmanship of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class or the precision of a BMW. Over time, the illusion fell apart. Vinyl peeled, chrome chipped, and squeaks developed in what was supposed to be a luxury interior. One owner would later say, "It looked great in the showroom. 2 years later, it sounded like a toolbox in the trunk every time I hit a bump." Then came the reliability issues. The early fuel injection system, though advanced for its time, was finicky and prone to failure. Electrical gremlins plagued the dashboard and climate control systems. Rust crept into the seams and doors. And because the Seville was positioned as Cadillac's top-priced sedan, repairs were outrageously expensive. It cost more than many of Cadillac's larger models, and yet it broke down more often. Mechanics grew used to seeing these cars roll in with stalling problems, warning lights, and mystery electrical faults that seemed to multiply with age. Cadillac had priced the Seville sky high to make it seem exclusive, but customers started realizing they were paying luxury money for a dressed-up Nova. Some buyers adored the styling, but many walked away feeling cheated. One frustrated owner famously remarked, "I bought a Cadillac and got a Chevrolet in a tuxedo." That line stuck because it summed up everything about the car. It was image without substance. Still, the Seville did sell well at first because it offered something Cadillac had never offered before, a smaller luxury car.
It found a market with older, loyal Cadillac buyers who didn't want a giant DeVille anymore, but still wanted a Cadillac badge on the hood. But among younger buyers and the European luxury crowd Cadillac hoped to impress, the car was a punchline. When you parked a Seville next to a Mercedes-Benz 450 SEL, the illusion fell apart instantly. The 1975 Cadillac Seville now lives in a strange corner of automotive history. It's remembered as Cadillac's awkward attempt to modernize without really changing anything important. It tried to be sleek and European, but underneath it was pure old-school Detroit excess. It was overpriced, unreliable, and wrapped in vinyl pretending to be leather. It didn't bring Cadillac the respect it craved, only the reminder that real luxury can't be faked with chrome and marketing slogans. It was a symbol of an era when American carmakers were desperately trying to stay relevant. And for all its ambition, the Seville remains one of the most notorious examples of a great idea ruined by shallow execution.
The 1959 Imperial LeBaron was not simply a luxury car. It was a monument to the peak of late 1950s American automotive excess. An era when the designers at Chrysler believed that if a little was good, more was infinitely better. It wasn't just a car you drove. It was a mobile performance of wealth, power, and showmanship. With a length stretching nearly 19 feet, massive rear fins that seemed to scrape the sky, and chrome trim covering virtually every inch, the LeBaron was a statement so bold it could not be ignored. It was Chrysler saying in every possible way, I am rich, I am extravagant, and I am bigger than life. And yet, beneath all that gleaming metal, it was a car that challenged every practical notion of driving. From the moment you approached it, the 1959 LeBaron was overwhelming. The front end featured Chrysler's trademark tall, imposing grille, flanked by quad headlights, each element polished to a mirror finish. Every line and angle screamed status, from the elongated hood that seemed almost ceremonially long to the sweeping side panels accented by delicate chrome strips. And those rear fins, impossibly tall and elegantly pointed, made it seem like the car could double as a spaceship, slicing through suburban streets with the grace of a yacht. Pedestrians instinctively knew to give it room. These fins weren't just design flourishes. They were symbolic daggers, a show of dominance on the asphalt. At noon, with the sun reflecting off all that chrome, you could practically be blinded just by standing near it. Inside, Chrysler's obsession with luxury was just as extreme. The cabin was a lush, padded expanse of vinyl, leather, and fabric that seemed to swallow passengers whole. The front and rear bench seats were incredibly soft, cushioned to the point of disorientation, creating a sensation that drivers and passengers alike described as floating. The dashboard was a spectacle of its own, a gleaming array of chrome, knobs, switches, and intricate gauges, designed less for function and more to impress anyone who glanced at it. Even controls like the climate system were ornate and luxurious, though prone to quirks, reflecting the era's combination of ambition and mechanical unreliability. The ride itself was surreal. Chrysler engineers had tuned the suspension to float over roads, emphasizing serenity over responsiveness. On a long, straight highway, the LeBaron felt like a slow, luxurious cruise atop a massive sofa. Every bump and imperfection in the road was absorbed with almost ghostly smoothness, and passengers often found themselves losing all sense of the road beneath them. Yet the very qualities that made the car float also made it feel untethered. On curves, it swayed dramatically, the body leaned with exaggerated motion, and drivers quickly realized that steering precision was not a priority. The car did not corner, it drifted. Attempting sharp maneuvers was both a challenge and a spectacle, as the LeBaron seemed to protest every sudden turn, reminding you that this was a vehicle designed for display, not agility. Power came courtesy of a massive 413 cubic inch V8 engine, producing ample torque and the deep, throaty growl that Chrysler wanted for its top-of-the-line model. But in practice, it had to move nearly 5 tons of steel, chrome, and decorative trim. Acceleration was deliberate, Not exciting. The engine's energy went into making the car feel stately and authoritative rather than sporty, but it also meant fuel consumption was catastrophic. Single-digit miles per gallon were common. Owners quickly learned that this car was expensive not just to buy, but to keep fueled. One contemporary reviewer quipped, "You don't drive the Imperial, you feed it." The practical realities of ownership were challenging. Visibility was limited by the long hood and wide roof pillars, braking was slow, and parking a nearly 19-foot yacht-like sedan required foresight and courage. The LeBaron's mechanical systems were also temperamental. Early electrical issues, quirks in the climate control, and delicate chrome trim meant that repairs were expensive and frequent. But for all the headaches, owners adored the spectacle. Driving a 1959 Imperial LeBaron guaranteed attention. It was an experience as theatrical as it was luxurious. A longtime collector once said, "Every drive felt like a parade. People stared, waved, sometimes took pictures. It didn't matter that it was heavy or slow or impossible to park. It was a star." Perhaps the most defining aspect of the LeBaron was its sheer audacity. In a world beginning to experience the first whispers of fuel crises, compact cars, and more pragmatic designs, Chrysler doubled down on the philosophy that bigger was better, and nothing could replace visual drama. The car was a rolling emblem of confidence, flamboyance, and the high watermark of 1950s American luxury. It was over the top in every way. Massive, ostentatious, flamboyant, and unapologetically so. Today, the 1959 Imperial LeBaron stands as an icon of an era when American cars weren't just transportation. They were moving sculptures, theater on wheels, and symbols of excess that could make you gasp, laugh, or admire in disbelief. Its fins remain a marvel of design daring, its chrome a gleaming testament to audacity, and its driving experience a reminder that luxury at its most extreme is rarely subtle. The LeBaron didn't just move people from point A to point B. It carried an attitude, a lifestyle, and a clear message. If you were in a 1959 Imperial LeBaron, the world was meant to notice. Seasick passengers and pedestrian squints be damned.
The 1963 Lincoln Continental convertible is a paradox in automotive history. At once one of the most beautiful and stylish cars ever built, and simultaneously one of the most finicky, high-maintenance, and temperamental vehicles of its era. Its design was revolutionary for the time, with clean, unbroken lines stretching from the long, elegant hood to the squared-off rear, a low stance that exuded sophistication, and the instantly recognizable suicide doors that opened rearward in a way no other American car dared. From afar, it looked effortless, the embodiment of 1960s cool. But get close and the truth emerged. This car demanded constant care, unwavering attention, and a wallet deep enough to keep it running without compromise. The power-operated convertible top was a technical marvel, but also the heart of many owners' frustrations. Its intricate system of motors, gears, hydraulic lines, and switches was designed to allow one person to open or close the roof smoothly. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it was a mechanical Rubik's Cube, prone to failure at the worst possible moments. Misaligned gears could jam the top, leaving it half open in a sudden rainstorm. Hydraulic leaks could render it inoperable for weeks, and replacement parts were expensive and often hard to find. Even those who treated the system with the utmost care eventually learned that owning a Continental convertible meant developing a close relationship with mechanics who suddenly found themselves richer than they had anticipated. One owner recalled, "The car was gorgeous, but every time the top acted up, I felt like I had to refinance my garage just to pay the repair bills." Rust was another relentless adversary. Despite its American luxury pedigree, the Continental's expansive body panels, flat surfaces, and intricate trim created ideal traps for moisture. Fenders, sills, door bottoms, and trunk floors were particularly vulnerable, and even careful owners found corrosion creeping in silently.
Unlike simpler cars of the era, repairing rust on a Continental wasn't just about replacing metal. It required real craftsmanship to preserve the car's impeccable lines, and that craftsmanship came at a premium. Those who overlooked maintenance quickly found themselves battling both the elements and an ever-increasing repair tab. The car's handling and performance were classic Lincoln indulgence, prioritizing comfort over driver engagement. Its massive V8 engine provided smooth, effortless cruising, but the sheer weight of the car, over 4,500 pounds, meant that acceleration was leisurely and throttle response was muted. Steering at low speeds was heavy, while high-speed maneuvering revealed significant body roll. Brakes were adequate but required planning, as sudden stops challenged both the car and the driver. The Continental was never meant to be a nimble performer. It was a floating palace on wheels, designed to glide over highways and boulevard streets with the poise of a yacht. Inside, the cabin continued the theme of elegance mixed with fragility. Plush leather seats enveloped passengers in luxury, padded extensively to provide maximum comfort, while chrome and wood trim accents covered every conceivable surface. The dash was a futuristic spectacle of knobs, switches, and gauges, many of which were prone to misalignment, electrical issues, or outright failure. Owners quickly learned that every feature, from the radio to the climate controls, required vigilance. A malfunction in one system could cascade into another, making the car feel like a living, breathing entity demanding constant attention. Even simple things like adjusting the windows or seats could become small adventures in patience and careful maneuvering. The suicide doors, while stylish and attention-grabbing, were another double-edged sword. Hinges could sag with age, door seals would fail, and opening them in tight spaces demanded both skill and courage. When they worked perfectly, they were a defining feature, dramatic, elegant, and iconic. When they didn't, they caused rattles, leaks, and costly repairs. Every entry and exit reminded drivers that owning a 1963 Lincoln Continental convertible was not just about status, it was about commitment. Despite its many challenges, the Lincoln Continental convertible became a cultural icon. It was the car of choice for celebrities, political figures, and tastemakers, immortalized in countless films, photos, and events. Its presence commanded attention, and even as it broke down, leaked, or rusted, people continued to covet it. The paradox of the car was that while it often caused headaches for its owners, it simultaneously elevated them in society. Driving a 1963 Lincoln Continental convertible was about more than transportation. It was about being seen, being admired, and making a statement that few other cars could match. Ultimately, the 1963 Lincoln Continental convertible stands as both a masterpiece of design and a cautionary tale of engineering ambition. It was elegant, luxurious, and breathtaking to behold, yet maddeningly complex, prone to failure, and expensive to maintain. Ownership demanded dedication, patience, and significant financial resources, but for those who could manage it, the rewards were extraordinary. A car that defined an era, turned heads wherever it went, and offered an unmatched sense of prestige. It remains an automotive legend, beautiful, temperamental, indulgent, and utterly unforgettable.
The 1971 Chrysler Imperial was an apex example of early 1970s American luxury, a car that seemed to exist in its own universe, where size, presence, and indulgence mattered more than logic, practicality, or drivability. Stretching nearly 19 feet from bumper to bumper, it was a rolling palace, a mammoth statement of wealth and status, and a vehicle that could swallow small sedans whole. Its styling was bold and dramatic, with squared-off lines, a towering hood, massive chrome accents, and a front grille so wide it could have been mistaken for the entrance to a bank vault. But beneath the elegant exterior was a car that tested the limits of both driver patience and mechanical tolerance. Handling was one of the first shocking truths owners discovered. The Imperial was ungainly, slow to respond, and prone to dramatic body roll around even gentle corners. Steering was over-assisted, yet vague, offering almost no feedback to the driver. You didn't drive this car, you guided it, with the understanding that it had its own ideas about where it wanted to go. One journalist famously quipped that it handled like a drunk walrus attempting ballet. The long wheelbase and soft suspension meant that every curb, speed bump, or pothole translated into a rolling, swaying sensation that made passengers feel like they were on a slowly rocking ship rather than an automobile. Under the massive hood was a 440 cubic inch V8 engine, producing enough torque to move the Imperial with authority, but not enough to make acceleration feel sprightly. Speed was a suggestion, not a guarantee. Even full throttle produced a languid, determined surge forward, accompanied by a deep, rumbling growl that reminded everyone that this was a monster of steel and luxury, not a sports car. Fuel economy was catastrophic, hovering in single digits, and highway trips became exercises in patience and budget management. Every fill-up was an event, and frequent stops at the pump were inevitable. The electrical system was another source of endless frustration. Components were prone to failure, wiring could short out without warning, and dashboard lights often flickered or died entirely. Features that were supposed to embody luxury, power windows, power seats, cruise control, and the famously complex air conditioning system, were temperamental at best. The air conditioning in particular was notorious for its unreliability. On hot summer days, owners could only hope that the system would function, because a failure turned the cabin into a stifling sauna. Repairs were costly and complicated, often requiring specialized knowledge of Chrysler's idiosyncratic engineering. Inside, the Imperial was a lavish experience. Deep, plush seats wrapped passengers in soft leather or vinyl, with thick carpeting that added to the sensation of riding on a cloud. Wood grain trim, chrome accents, and a wide dashboard dominated the interior, making the car feel more like a luxurious lounge than a functional vehicle. Yet the indulgence came with consequences. Weighty doors that challenged even the strongest driver, intricate controls prone to misalignment, and vast cabin spaces that allowed rattles and squeaks to develop over time. Every ride reminded owners that owning a 1971 Imperial was as much about spectacle as it was about transportation. Parking this behemoth was a separate ordeal entirely. The Imperial demanded enormous turning radii, wide streets, and generous curb space. One could not simply pull into a standard city parking spot. Driving it in urban areas required strategy, patience, and a touch of luck. Many owners joked that you needed your own dedicated parking lot just to house it safely. Despite its challenges, the 1971 Chrysler Imperial had an undeniable presence. It represented the pinnacle of American luxury, a mobile throne for those who wanted to be seen, heard, and admired. Celebrities, executives, and socialites loved it for its grandeur, its commanding road presence, and the sheer indulgence of driving such a massive, opulent machine. Yet for every admirer, there was a mechanic laughing all the way to the bank, fixing the quirks, leaks, and electrical tantrums that the car threw at its owners. The 1971 Imperial now stands as a monument to an era when American carmakers equated luxury with scale, chrome, and theatricality. It was excessive in every way, large, soft, gluttonous, and impossibly grand. Driving it was an exercise in patience and tolerance, maintaining it a lesson in perseverance and expense. And yet, for those who could handle its quirks, the Chrysler Imperial offered a unique experience. A ride that enveloped you in opulence, announced your status to the world, and made you feel like you were piloting an automobile unlike any other. It was a rolling spectacle, a mechanical drama, and a reminder that in the early 1970s, bigger really was better, even if bigger came with headaches.
The 1956 Continental Mark II stands as one of the most intriguing paradoxes in automotive history, a vehicle that simultaneously represents pinnacle elegance and catastrophic impracticality. Ford's vision was audacious. They wanted to create an American luxury car that could directly challenge Rolls-Royce, a sedan so refined and exclusive that it would elevate the United States to the upper echelons of global automotive sophistication. They aimed for perfection, from styling to craftsmanship, and spared no expense. Yet the result was as much a cautionary tale as it was a masterpiece. A car whose ambition exceeded the market, budget, and even the patience of those who tried to own it. Externally, the Mark II is breathtaking. It wears a long, low-slung hood and a short, elegant rear deck that together create a silhouette of absolute sophistication. Its lines are clean and purposeful, in stark contrast to the ostentatious fins and chrome-laden excesses that dominated other American cars of the era. Every contour was thoughtfully designed to evoke refinement. The gently curved fenders, the polished grille with its subtle majesty, the perfectly proportioned headlights. It looked European, yet unmistakably American in scale. Those who first glimpsed the Mark II often described it as a rolling tuxedo, a statement of taste so refined that it seemed almost untouchable. Yet the very perfection of its exterior belied a set of engineering challenges that would make owning it a full-time commitment. Inside, the Continental Mark II continued its declaration of uncompromising luxury. The cabin was wrapped in hand-stitched leather with carefully selected wood veneers and chrome details that suggested a level of craftsmanship rare in America at the time. Every seat was padded to perfection, every control intuitively placed, and every surface polished to a gleam. But as exquisite as the interior was, it was a fragile environment. Even minor repairs or adjustments required specialized labor. Nothing could be fixed casually. Owners quickly learned that maintaining a Mark II was an exercise in patience and expense, an ongoing relationship with skilled mechanics who understood the unique demands of the car. Under the hood, the Mark II was powered by a 368 cubic inch V8, producing a respectable 285 horsepower. On paper, it promised smooth, effortless cruising, yet the car's weight, over 4,500 pounds, made acceleration leisurely, almost dignified in its slowness. Handling followed the same theme. The steering was slow, the brakes demanded anticipation, and corners revealed pronounced body roll. This was not a car for speed or excitement. It was a stately, elegant vessel designed for those who preferred refinement over urgency. Yet driving it required awareness, patience, and respect for its bulk. Even routine maneuvers became exercises in control, and one could never forget that beneath the beauty lay a massive machine that would challenge even seasoned drivers. Financially, the Mark II was a disaster for Ford. Every vehicle cost far more to produce than it sold for, with hand-built construction, meticulous detailing, and high-end materials driving costs into the stratosphere. Early buyers were few and far between, not necessarily because they disliked the car, but because it demanded a financial commitment few were willing to make. Repairs and maintenance were notoriously expensive. Any issue with the engine, electrical system, or bodywork required skilled technicians and specialized parts. A single mechanical failure could cost more than purchasing a typical car of the era outright. One contemporary journalist observed, "The Mark II is like owning a jewel. It gleams, it impresses, but every scratch, every repair, and every mile comes at a fortune." Rust was another silent adversary. Even careful owners found that flat body panels and intricate trim created pockets where moisture could settle, leading to corrosion that compromised both aesthetics and structural integrity. The car's exclusivity meant that replacing or repairing these panels was a complicated and costly endeavor. Over time, the combination of rarity, fragility, and high-maintenance systems only amplified the car's mystique and its reputation as an impractical indulgence. The Mark II's market performance reflected these issues. Fewer than 3,000 were produced over 2 years, cementing its status as rare and collectible, but also confirming it as a commercial flop. Ford had hoped to create an American Rolls-Royce, a vehicle that would elevate the company's prestige and attract elite buyers. Instead, the Mark II became a symbol of ambition outpacing practicality, a lesson in how elegance alone cannot overcome cost, maintenance challenges, and market realities. Despite its flaws, the Continental Mark II's legacy is immense. It remains one of the most beautiful cars ever produced in America, a vehicle that demonstrated what Detroit could achieve when it reached for perfection. Driving or owning one was never convenient. It was a lifestyle choice, a statement of taste and audacity. Every curve, every leather stitch, every gleaming chrome accent broadcast sophistication, but also demanded vigilance, patience, and financial endurance. It was the ultimate luxury paradox, a car of extraordinary beauty that was simultaneously a mechanical challenge, a financial gamble, and a symbol of ambition untempered by practicality. In the end, the 1956 Continental Mark II endures not because it was commercially successful, it wasn't, but because it represents a pinnacle of American automotive design, a dream of elegance and sophistication that few could fully experience. It was a car that tried to be perfect, and in many ways it succeeded. Yet it remains a luxury failure, dressed in a tuxedo, as unforgettable as it is impractical, as beautiful as it is temperamental, and as legendary as it is rare.
The 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado is one of those cars that promised the future and delivered something closer to chaos on wheels. When GM unveiled it, the world was awed. Here was a big, stylish American luxury coupe, but with a revolutionary twist, front-wheel drive. At the time, it was virtually unheard of in a domestic vehicle of such size, and Oldsmobile marketed it as the next step in automotive evolution. The styling was sleek and muscular, with a long hood, short deck, and a bold, dramatic grille. On paper, it was futuristic, luxurious, and cutting-edge, the kind of car that made rich buyers feel as though they were piloting the personal spaceship of the 1960s. But behind that glamorous exterior lurked a driving experience that was often surprising, sometimes terrifying, and ultimately unforgettable in all the wrong ways. Underneath its flamboyant body was a massive 425 cubic inch V8 paired with GM's new THM 425 transmission, mounted transversely to power the front wheels. The combination was revolutionary, but imperfect. The car's torque was immense, and the steering, lightweight in theory to match the front-wheel drive layout, became a source of chaos under acceleration. Torque steer was not a minor quirk. It violently yanked the wheel from drivers' hands when they attempted to accelerate hard, leaving even experienced motorists grasping for control. For wealthy buyers expecting effortless sophistication, the sensation was jarring if not slightly humiliating. Luxury was supposed to feel smooth and secure, but the Toronado instead taught a lesson in respect for physics and heavy engineering. The ride and handling were equally paradoxical. The car was massive, nearly 18 feet long and over 4,000 pounds, and its soft suspension prioritized comfort over cornering stability. On a straight road, it floated like a yacht, and passengers might have felt pampered in the deep, cushioned seats trimmed in leather or premium vinyl. But any attempt at spirited driving revealed the Toranado's instability. The front-heavy design combined with front-wheel drive torque produced unpredictable oversteer and exaggerated lean and corners. While other American coupes of the era could rely on brute force and rear-wheel drive to mask poor handling, the Toronado was mercilessly honest. It exposed every design compromise and magnified every quirk. The result was a car that was both luxurious and terrifying, a paradox that few buyers fully appreciated until they were behind the wheel. Inside, the Toronado embraced GM's vision of high-tech luxury. The cabin was spacious and comfortable, with a long, sweeping dashboard and futuristic touches like a column-mounted transmission shifter and optional air conditioning. Instruments were clear and modern, and the front bench seat offered a commanding view of the road. Yet even here, the experimental nature of the car introduced minor irritations. The weight of the front drive system necessitated compromises in steering geometry and suspension tuning, which translated into a driving experience that could feel unpredictable, especially in emergency maneuvers. It was a car designed to impress while stationary, but one that tested nerves and patience in motion. Mechanically, the Toronado was an ambitious but high-maintenance machine. GM's engineers pioneered the use of unitized construction, front-wheel drive torque converters, and innovative suspension design, all of which were feats of engineering for the mid-1960s. But each innovation came with complexity, and early models required careful attention to avoid premature wear or mechanical failure. Maintaining the Toronado was expensive. Specialized knowledge was necessary for even routine repairs. For the average wealthy buyer who expected luxury without effort, the combination of torque steer, complex mechanics, and the occasional quirk quickly tarnished the initial excitement. Public perception was mixed. Enthusiasts marveled at the Toranado's audacity and technological innovation, while more conservative buyers were intimidated by its quirks. It had the appearance of a high-end luxury coupe, but delivered a driving experience that could be unnerving. Some owners embraced the challenge, enjoying the thrill of piloting something so radical, while others found themselves frustrated, unable to reconcile the futuristic promises with the practical realities. Its radical design, once a selling point, contributed to its gradual fading from popular memory, a car remembered for ambition more than enduring desirability. Ultimately, the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado is remembered as a bold experiment in automotive history, a luxurious, futuristic car that pushed boundaries but demanded respect, patience, and skill. It is a testament to GM's willingness to innovate and take risks, yet it also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of marrying cutting-edge technology with massive American steel. The Toronado looked like a car of tomorrow, but driving it reminded owners that the future could be unpredictable, exhilarating, and occasionally terrifying, all at once.
The 1974 Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham was an apex of American automotive indulgence, a vehicle that practically redefined what it meant to live large on wheels. From the moment it rolls into view, the sheer scale alone makes an impression. A nearly 19-foot-long behemoth with a wheelbase that rivals a small apartment, towering chrome bumpers that could almost double as defensive walls, and sculpted side panels that glint like molten silver in the sun. Every element was designed not for subtlety or practicality, but for the spectacle of wealth and status. In an era when luxury meant size, comfort, and visibility, the Fleetwood Brougham took the concept to its extreme. It wasn't merely a car. It was a mobile throne room, a personal stage for its owners to announce their affluence to anyone within sight. Step inside, and the sense of indulgence becomes nearly overwhelming. The interior was an exercise in over-the-top opulence, as if every material that could be used, leather, vinyl, chrome, and thick carpeting, had been deployed in maximum quantity. The seats were oversized, plush, and designed to envelop the occupants entirely, giving a feeling of being cradled on a moving cloud. Decorative curtains, elaborate door panels, and soft headliners turned the cabin into something resembling a private luxury suite. The dashboard stretched wide across the front, laden with gleaming chrome and enormous gauges that emphasized grandeur over minimalism. Every detail, from the thick steering wheel to the luxurious trim along the doors, was intended to impress and to communicate that you were in the top echelon of society, no compromises allowed. Passengers weren't merely traveling. They were being pampered, surrounded by comfort and style that dwarfed most other cars of the era. Yet beneath this glittering exterior lurked a mechanical reality that could humble even the wealthiest owner. The Fleetwood Brougham's enormous 500 cubic inch V8 provided effortless power for highway cruising, but it also demanded enormous amounts of gasoline. Fuel economy was nearly irrelevant in a car that measured indulgence by its size. Steering was ponderous, and though the suspension was designed to float smoothly over bumps, the softness meant the car leaned dramatically around corners, creating a sensation akin to piloting a barge through a narrow canal. Braking required foresight. Sudden stops felt precarious due to the car's immense weight. The mechanical systems were powerful but fragile in their complexity. Air conditioning, electrical components, power windows, and power seats all carried an almost theatrical unreliability, often failing at the most inconvenient moments and reminding owners that luxury came with constant vigilance. Every dashboard light, every motor, every connection was a potential source of expense and stress, and few could truly master the car without accepting that breakdowns were part of the experience. Even day-to-day tasks demanded patience and skill. Parking the Fleetwood Brougham was a serious undertaking. Its sheer length and width meant that most standard city spots were entirely inadequate, forcing drivers to plot maneuvers carefully and sometimes take multiple attempts just to align the car properly. Tight turns required planning, and urban driving could feel like piloting a battleship through a narrow canal. And while it glided effortlessly down open highways, the car's size and weight could be intimidating in traffic, making the driver acutely aware of the consequences of error. Despite these challenges, the Fleetwood Brougham was adored by those who valued its spectacle and prestige. Celebrities, executives, and the affluent appreciated the way it communicated power, taste, and luxury. Its presence on the road was commanding. The car turned heads even while stationary, and in motion it enveloped its passengers in a private world of softness and elegance. This was a car meant to be admired, to create a sense of awe, and to serve as a visual testament to its owner's wealth and refinement. Even mechanical failures could not entirely diminish the aura of prestige that surrounded it. If anything, it reinforced the idea that this was no ordinary vehicle, but a complex living monument to extravagance. The 1974 Fleetwood Brougham also serves as a historical marker of a particular era in American automotive culture. This was a time when bigger truly was better, when luxury was measured in chrome, cushioning, and visual impact, and when the automobile was as much about social signaling as it was about transportation. Its quirks, failures, and maintenance headaches were all part of the narrative. Owning one was not simply about driving, but about participating in a lifestyle that few could sustain. Those who embraced it accepted a partnership with a car that required care, patience, and significant financial resources. Ultimately, the Fleetwood Brougham endures as a symbol of American excess, audacity, and craftsmanship at its most ambitious. It is impossible to ignore, and impossible to forget. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a rolling palace, a mechanical drama on wheels. It combined comfort, drama, and spectacle into one massive package, a car that could overwhelm the senses, challenge its owner, and still somehow offer a uniquely luxurious experience unlike any other. Driving it required respect, maintaining it demanded diligence, but experiencing it, even in moments of mechanical failure or uneasy handling, was nothing short of unforgettable. The 1974 Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham is not merely remembered, it is celebrated as the ultimate rolling icon of an era when American luxury reached its absolute, audacious peak.
The 1959 Lincoln Premier is one of the most extreme examples of American automotive ambition, a car that seems to have been conceived in a boardroom where the guiding principle was bigger, bolder, and more dazzling than anything else. At first sight, it is overwhelming.
Its body stretches almost 19 feet long, with tail fins so enormous they could be mistaken for architectural statements, chrome so abundant it practically reflects the entire cityscape, and a front grille so massive that it looks like a wall rather than a car. Its width is equally astounding, giving the sense that two of these vehicles could barely fit side by side on a standard lane. Every detail, from the hood ornament to the sweeping rear fenders, was designed to impress, to intimidate, and to ensure that the Lincoln Premier could never blend into the background. This was a car that broadcast status before the ignition was even turned on. Step inside, and the extravagance continues, almost to the point of absurdity. The interior was enormous, with a cavernous front bench seat and a rear bench that could comfortably accommodate 3 or 4 adults, making it feel more like a luxurious parlor than a car cabin. Plush leather upholstery, thick padded carpeting, polished chrome trim, and extensive use of brightwork turned every glance into a visual feast. Many models included decorative rear window curtains, a whimsical and ostentatious touch that highlighted the car's commitment to theatrical elegance. The dashboard was monumental, adorned with sweeping instruments and controls that communicated sophistication, even if their functionality occasionally left something to be desired. Passengers didn't merely sit, they were cocooned in a mobile palace, a slow-moving sanctuary of luxury. But behind the glamour lurked the realities of engineering a vehicle of such unprecedented scale. The Lincoln Premier's massive 430 cubic inch or 475 cubic inch V8 engine provided enough power to move the car, but acceleration was deliberate, almost ceremonious. The weight of nearly 5,000 pounds combined with the wide stance meant the car leaned dramatically on corners, and even gentle curves became exercises in patience and careful steering. Torque steer was minimal compared to later front-drive experiments, but the sheer momentum of the car created a feeling of inertia that could overwhelm inattentive drivers. Parking, turning, or navigating urban streets required strategic planning, as the vehicle demanded more space than most intersections could provide. Driving the Premier was a commitment. It required full attention, respect for its mass, and an acceptance that the car had a personality all its own. Mechanical complexity compounded these challenges. The Lincoln Premier was filled with power accessories, electrical features, and luxury amenities that often functioned unreliably. Power windows, air conditioning, and the intricate horn and signal systems were prone to failure, and each repair was costly. Parts were not interchangeable with other Lincolns, and many components were unique to the Premier, requiring specialized knowledge to replace or service. Owning this car was an exercise in patience and financial endurance. Even minor issues could balloon into major projects. Fuel economy was another cruel joke. The V8 devoured gasoline like a starved monster, turning every long trip into a parade of pump stops. The practicalities of driving were often secondary to the demands of maintaining the vehicle in operable condition. The public reaction to the Lincoln Premier was as dramatic as the car itself. It was admired, photographed, and sought after by wealthy buyers who wanted the ultimate expression of status. Its flamboyant styling and immense size ensured that it became an instant icon, a vehicle synonymous with luxury, success, and mid-century American opulence. But behind the awe was a recognition that the car's extravagance came with cost, financial, practical, and sometimes emotional. The Premier was beautiful, commanding, and glamorous, yet it was also thirsty, unwieldy, and prone to mechanical headaches. It exemplified the tension between ambition and reality, style and function, fantasy and everyday life. Today, the 1959 Lincoln Premier remains an unforgettable symbol of an era when American automotive design pushed the limits of scale, luxury, and excess. It is a car that inspires awe and laughter, admiration and frustration, often all at once.
Driving one was an event, owning one was a responsibility, maintaining one was a challenge that only the dedicated could endure. Yet despite its impracticalities, the Premier endures as a monument to boldness, ambition, and unapologetic indulgence. It reminds us that in the late 1950s, American automakers didn't just sell cars, they sold dreams, fantasies of power and status, and rolling declarations of style. The Lincoln Premier was all of these things, a car that could overwhelm the senses, challenge the driver, and dazzle anyone who saw it, standing as one of the most extreme and memorable examples of automotive ambition in history.
The 1968 Buick Electra 225, known affectionately among the wealthy as the Deuce and a Quarter, is one of the purest expressions of late 1960s American automotive excess. From the first glance, it is a car that overwhelms the senses. Measuring nearly 19 feet long and almost 7 feet wide, it dominates any roadway it enters, with a presence that leaves smaller vehicles feeling like toys in comparison. The sweeping lines, exaggerated tail fins, and copious chrome accents make the Electra 225 impossible to ignore. Its design seems to shout wealth, status, and taste, while simultaneously daring anyone to question the priorities of the era's automakers. The front grille alone is monumental, wide and imposing, framed by twin headlights that peer forward like watchful sentinels. Even from a distance, the Electra 225 communicates, "This is a car built for attention, and it will receive it whether you like it or not." Step inside, and the sense of indulgence becomes almost absurd. The cabin is enormous, offering space that feels more like a small parlor than an automobile. Thick, plush leather upholstery wraps the seats, which are so soft they seem designed to melt under the body's weight. Carpeting is deep and luxurious, absorbing footsteps and adding to the floating sensation as the car glides along the road. Chrome trim surrounds nearly every surface, reflecting light in dazzling patterns, while the dashboard stretches from door to door like a grand stage. Even minor details, from power window switches to door handles, are oversized and flashy, emphasizing extravagance over efficiency. The rear passengers especially were treated like royalty. With generous legroom, wide seats, and armrests, the Electra 225 made long trips feel indulgent, even if the driver secretly cursed its unwieldy proportions. Decorative rear window curtains added a theatrical touch, framing the outside world like a stage, further immersing passengers in the illusion of luxury. Yet the driving experience tells a very different story. Beneath the polished hood sits a massive V8 engine, either 430 or 455 cubic inches, depending on the configuration, producing enough torque to move the enormous vehicle, but acceleration is slow, deliberate, and heavy. Steering is ponderous at low speeds and floaty at higher speeds, and the massive dimensions make the car feel like a barge, not a road vehicle. Cornering exaggerates body roll to near comedic levels, and the brakes require careful anticipation. Sudden stops risk unsettling the car entirely. The Electra 225 is not a car for reactive driving. It is a vehicle that demands forethought, patience, and respect for its mass. Attempting to handle it with modern expectations of agility and responsiveness is an exercise in frustration. One quickly learns that this is a car to be admired in motion, not challenged. Mechanically, the Electra 225 could be as demanding as it was ostentatious. The combination of power steering, power brakes, and numerous luxury features required constant attention. Electrical systems could be temperamental. Air conditioning was prone to failure, and the suspension, though cushioned for comfort, was not forgiving of neglect. Parts were specific to this model, and maintenance was expensive, with minor repairs often requiring specialized knowledge or long hours in the shop. Fuel economy was abysmal, even by 1960 standards, and the enormous engine seemed to drink gasoline like a greedy beast. Owning an Electra 225 was not just a matter of wealth, but a commitment to continuous maintenance and financial endurance. Despite all of these quirks, the Electra 225 was immensely popular with the affluent. Its vast proportions, sumptuous interior, and endless chrome made it a statement car.
one that spoke loudly of wealth and prestige. Its nickname, the Deuce and a Quarter, was whispered with reverence among its owners, a badge of honor signaling that they had achieved a level of luxury few others could access. Its design, while impractical for tight city streets or spirited driving, communicated power and status at a glance, which was often more important than performance for its target audience. The legacy of the 1968 Buick Electra 225 lies in its sheer audacity. It is a car that celebrates indulgence in the grandest possible way, prioritizing luxury, spectacle, and presence over practicality, efficiency, or performance. Driving it was an experience in patience and skill, while ownership was an ongoing relationship with maintenance and expense. Yet all of its mechanical quirks, fuel-guzzling habits, and cumbersome size only reinforce its role as a symbol of an era when American cars were at their largest, most extravagant, and most unapologetically showy. The Electra 225 is a monument to excess, a rolling palace, and an icon of style so bold that it continues to inspire awe and occasional laughter more than 50 years after its debut. In every way, the Deuce and a Quarter is more than a car. It is a statement, a lifestyle, and an audacious challenge to anyone who doubts that American automakers in the 1960s were willing to push boundaries of scale, luxury, and spectacle. To drive it is to experience history, indulgence, and absurdity simultaneously. To cradle yourself in plush luxury while wrestling with a mechanical leviathan that reminds you at every turn that yes, bigger was better, no matter the cost, complexity, or consequences. It is impossible to ignore, impossible to handle easily, and entirely unforgettable. The quintessential late 60s American luxury car in all its overblown glory.